In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a coil vessel. First, you'll need a fettling knife, a wood tool, this one's a wooden knife, a needle tool, and something to score with. I'm going to use a fork for this demo. You'll also need slip, and you may need a spray bottle of water and a rib tool. So I'm going to start out with some pre-wedged clay that I've shaped into a log. And I'm going to roll on the table. When I'm rolling on the table, I'm using the palm of my hand, a nice flat surface. I don't want to use my fingers. And I'm going to give the clay nice even pressure, moving the palms of my hands across the clay. If you experience some flopping, you want to squeeze the clay and then twist it. By twisting the clay, I'm creating lots of little edges, and it will be easier to roll than a flat edge. Giving the clay nice even pressure and rolling all the way across with my hands. I'm keeping my hands together. If I separate them, they might move at different paces, and then it's harder to give the clay even pressure and it gets out of control. If you notice that it's sticking to your table, you can give the clay a little bit of moisture. I'm using my sponge to wet the clay. Make sure your hands are wet, and it'll slide across the table more fluidly. You want to roll this until it's about the thickness of your thumb. That'll be a good size coil to begin your vessel with. So I'm going to roll it a little bit more. Notice that the whole coil is moving together as I roll it. If I notice thicker areas, I might apply a little more pressure. And I'm going to stop right there. You may see some cracking along your coil. To fix that, I'm just going to wipe it down with a sponge to smooth those cracks out. And then I'm going to begin by attaching my first coil to my base. Okay, so I've rolled a base using the slab roller. You could also coil a base, but a slab base is going to be a little bit stronger. It will prevent the bottom from having an S-shaped crack. I'm going to cut down my base by using a cup for a template. I'm just going to set that on the base, and I can use a fettling knife or a needle tool. I'm going to use a needle tool, and make sure to hold that up nice and straight and just cut along the edge. And then to end, I can just pull outward, and that'll separate the clay, pull the excess off, set that aside. I can use it to make a coil later. And to free the clay from the cup, I'm going to pinch the cup gently, and it will come loose. I'm going to write my initials on the bottom of it, and I like to also write my name on the piece of paper that I'm using to make sure that it doesn't stick to the bat. That way I know it's my piece and it won't get confused. They look a lot alike in the beginning. So I'm going to write Mrs. Hanson on the bottom. And then the hour. And then I can use my hand, gently lift the piece, make sure not to stretch it. Mine's kind of sticking to the paper because it was a little bit wet. I can double up my paper. Flip it over, and don't worry about the paper that's on here. That will burn away in the kiln. You can peel it off if you really want, but I'm not going to bother with it. The first coil I want to score and slip to the base just to make sure it has an extra strong bottom. I don't want the bottom to fall off. So I'm going to score the base using a fork. That'll kind of peel up some of the paper too if you have extra paper stuck on the bottom. So I've scored the bottom. I also want to score my first coil. And scoring's not really deep, you just want to make a few grooves so that it works like Velcro. But if you do it too deep, you can trap air. And then I'm going to take my slip and either brush it on the base or brush it on the coil. I'm going to do it on the base, it's a little bit easier. And just get one thin layer. You don't want too much or it's going to ooze out all over. And this is just going to kind of break down the clay and help it to attach. So I'm going to pick up my coil and match up the scoring. I don't want to stretch the coil out, so I'm just being really gentle. And make sure those score marks match up with the score marks below. And when I get to this spot, my coil's a little bit big. It can either overlap and I can press it down, or I can cut the coil and just stack rings. And I like the nice, neat look of when it's stacked in rings, so I'm gonna cut the coil. And to do that, I'll take a fettling knife and I'm gonna cut on an angle. The reason I'm cutting on an angle is because an angle creates more surface for the clay to attach to, and that's going to make a stronger bond. So take away the extra, and then they should match up nicely just like that. I'm going to score and slip these. Put a little slip on one side and match up the edges. You want to blend them together, pinching a little bit, but making sure not to lose the thickness of the coil, and blend them together. Okay, now I'm going to join the coil to the base. Right now it's just kind of sitting on there, so I want to give it a little bit of pressure. Again, not losing the shape of the coil. I'm just pressing it down to the base. It's more like compressing. I'm pushing in on the edges and pushing down at the same time so that the coil still retains its shape. And then I'm going to smooth out the inside and the outside, because you can see right now there are some gaps. So to do that, I can use a wooden tool, or I can use the back of my finger, like my fingernail. So I'm going to first show you just with my hand. I'm holding this outside edge where I'm going to push against, and I'm taking a little bit of the clay and pushing down. Can you actually see it? Do you need to be closer? So I'm taking a piece of the clay and pushing it down to the base with my finger. You can do the same thing if your hand can't quite fit inside there. With this wooden tool, it's kind of shaped like a curved finger, and I can take a little bit of it, press down in, all the way around. This is why you want to make your coil a little bit thicker, because some of it's getting eaten up in this process. And then to smooth it out, I just get my finger wet and I can pull along the inside. Same thing with this tool, wooden tool, just pull and smooth those out. So you have a nice blended edge. Now that I've finished smoothing the inside, I'm also going to want to smooth the outside, because you have that rough edge right there. The first coil you can blend to the base. So to do that, I can use my finger, or I can use the wooden tool again. So I'm just blending, either pulling from the bottom or pushing from the top, blending that gap, and then I can go back through and smooth it out with my finger. Now that my base is all smoothed out, I'm going to roll another coil. I'm actually using the end of the last coil. And I'm going to stack it on top of the previous coil. Now to get it to stack straight up, I want to stack the coil directly on top of the previous coil. If I wanted it to come outward like this, I would stack it on the outside edge, like that. This coil is not quite big enough. Or if I wanted it to come in, I could stack it on the inside, like that, and it'll start to taper inward. So this one we're just gonna go straight up. So I'm making sure that my coil is lined up with the previous coil. I'm gonna overlap and cut my coil on an angle again, making sure not to cut through. If you're worried about cutting through, I can pull this coil off and set it on the table. Cut on an angle, get rid of the excess clay. Score and slip these back together. You can use a needle tool or my fork to score and slip. And sometimes in this process, it gets a little bit stretched out, so know that it might be sitting a little bit on the outside. So I'm going to score and slip those together, compress that, and blend it back together. You want to spend a lot of time to make sure these are neat. I'm trying to quickly do this because it's a demo. Blending those together so it looks like one uniform circle or ring. And then I'm going to gently pick this up without stretching and set it on top of my base. I do not have to score and slip this coil because it's new clay to new clay. If this were a new day and I had made my base before, I would score and slip the first coil that I make. So when it's old to new, you score and slip. But fresh clay to fresh clay or new clay to new clay, you don't have to score and slip. So I'm just going to press it down. And I'm going to blend the inside again. I'm going to leave the outside because you want the coils for texture and for the appearance of a coil pot. But in the future, if you're making a coil pot, you could blend both sides if you wanted to. So I'm going to just blend the inside. And you always want to do this the day that you add the clay. If you wait a day, it's going to be too hard to blend. So I'm just taking a little piece of the clay and pulling it down to the ring before. And then I'm going to go back through. You want to support the outside edge with one hand and blend the clay so that it's nice and smooth on the inside. And you're going to do this all the way around each time you add a new ring. And remember, you have to do it the day that you add the clay, or it won't be soft enough to blend if you wait a day. Okay, so on the outside you can see my rings. It's nice and smooth. I don't have any score marks on there. If you notice any cracking or maybe your fingernails make a mark, you can take a sponge and just blend them out. Be careful not to blend the two coils together. You want to show your coils. And then I'm going to continue to stack the coils. Again, I said if I want the shape to come outward, I'm going to stack the coil on the outside edge so it would be more out here. And if I want it to come inward, then I'm going to stack on the inside edge. If we're just going straight up, you can stack the coils directly on top of one another. Here you have the linked spheres, the swirl, the wave, a rainbow, twisted coils, and braided coils. I'm going to show you how to make each of the following designs. For the linked spheres, I'm going to roll out a coil. You want to make sure you're standing up when you roll out your coil, and I'm using the palms of my hands to roll out a unified coil. And then I'm going to use my fettling knife to cut equal sections. I'm going to discard the end because it's a little rough. So equal size sections to get equal size spheres. You can just stack them up and kind of trace it. And you can make as many of these as you want. You could do a whole row of spheres on your coil pot. I'm just going to add a few. So I take my little coil piece in my hand and roll it in the center of my hand, kind of like cup it in the little divot in the center of your palm and roll it together. And this will make nice even size spheres because I lined up all those coils to make sure I was cutting the same size piece each time. And you want them to be even so that when you set them on the coil, it's a nice thickness as it goes around the pot. If they were all different sizes, it would be hard to line the next coil up. And then attaching these to your piece. Again, if it's new clay to new clay, you don't have to score and slip, but if it's old to new, I would score and slip. I'm just going to set these on. And it sometimes helps if they're a little bit teardrop shape. So I'll make the end stick out a little bit. And when I'm setting them on there, if the end's sticking out, it makes it a little bit easier for me to support on the outside and pull the back of the teardrop into the coil below. So if there's a little bit sticking out, I can just smooth it into the coil below. And you want to make sure they're nice and tight together so that there's not a gap. Otherwise it won't be watertight. To create a swirl, I'm going to take a coil that I've rolled out. You want to wet it down so that it sticks to itself. And I'm going to pinch the end in tightly. And I'm doing that so that no water escapes right there. There's often a gap. And then I can either pick the end up of the coil and twist it around, or for me it's a little bit easier to roll the coil in on itself. And you can make this as large as you want. I might squeeze it every so often to fill in some gaps. And then when I get to the desired length, I'm just gonna cut on an angle so that it kind of rounds. If it's slightly out of round, I can pick this coil up and roll it. To attach this, I would probably score and slip since it's nice and tall. You might want to score and slip it to the base. So rough it up. Add a little slip. Now I'm squeezing it. You might have to kind of turn it to match the shape of your vessel. Pressing down, giving it some compression. And then on the back side, I'm going to blend. And you want to blend the back, the entire back of the sphere, or the swirl, sorry, so that none of the water that you'd put in this vessel would go through there. Blend it together, and on the outside it still looks good, but all the crevices are blended in on the back side. Next, I'm going to make the wave. I want to wet this coil. And I'm just going to fold the clay on itself. You want to close all the gaps so no water can get through. You can make this however tall you want. If there's extra that doesn't quite make one edge, I can cut that off right here. Press it together to attach it to my base. I can set it on here. You may want to score and slip, or you can just blend the back, supporting the outside, blending it into the base. And the outside edge should still look good. Next, we're going to do the rainbow. I'm going to start with a sphere. And then I probably want my coil to be slightly thinner than previous coils. So I'm going to roll it a little bit thinner because I'm stacking so many coils together. My coil's kind of sticking to the table right now. It's okay. And I'm just gonna wrap a coil around my sphere, leaving a little extra hanging over. I can continue to do that as much as I want. And then I'm going to cut it down level with the sphere. So I can just line my fettling knife up and cut that extra off. To attach this, I'm going to gently pick it up. It might kind of separate a little bit, but when we blend the back, it should be okay. To attach this, I'm going to press it to the base and blend the back side, making sure to support the outside again so you don't push any of the sphere or the coils out. Blend the entire back side. Smooth it with my finger. And it looks good on the outside. And now for the twisted coil. To get a twisted coil, I'm going to roll out 2 coils that are slightly thinner than the coils that we originally started with because they're going to be too wide. So I want to make them about half as thick, maybe a little bit thicker than that because they kind of stretch out when you twist the coils. I'll line them up together. It's okay if one's a little bit longer than the other. You can twist them by just overlapping like this. If you would like the twist to be tighter, you're going to pull in opposite directions with your hand. So with my left hand, I'm going to push forward. With my right hand, I'm going to pull back at the same time. And that will twist the coil tighter. If you like the loose round look, you can just attach your coil like that. Or you can flatten out the coil. So I can take my hand and press it down a little bit to give it a flatter look. And it's kind of a tighter twist. I would then attach my coil to the base. You can score and slip, or I can pull down on the inside like I've been doing. So I'm going to cut it off right here where it meets up. And you may have to do some adjusting on both sides. These are butting up to the swirl and the rainbow, so I have to cut it and kind of taper. I want to support the outside, and I'm going to blend on the inside. You may have some gaps like this that need to be filled with a little bit of clay, or you just want to make sure that when you're pulling down, you completely close off that gap, like so. And then the twist is attached to your base. For the braided coil, you're going to want 3 thin coils. The reason we're going to go thinner is because we're tripling the coils now, so you want them to kind of all equal out to be one large coil. I'm going to pinch them together at the end. You can cut any extra off. I had some fingernail marks in that one. And then you're going to braid just like you would braiding hair. So holding that down, overlap one side. Just like this, taking the outside edges and bringing them towards the center. Right outside edge into the center, left outside edge into the center, right outside edge into the center, left outside edge into the center, until you finish. and I can cut my excess off, pinch the ends together. This does leave some gaps. If you'd like it to be a little bit tighter, you can pinch them together and press down to flatten it out. Usually I recommend using a braid near the top of your piece, then it's okay if there are some gaps, it'll still be watertight for most of the piece, and then just at the top you'll have some gaps. So, to attach this, I'm going to set it on my piece, make sure to fit it to the edges, use my fettling knife to cut the excess off, line it up, just like that, and then cut the excess off again. And then I can blend the inside of the piece, holding the outside edge, blending together to make it attached. Now that I've showed you multiple ways to create coil designs, keep in mind balance and rhythm to create a unified form.